Guys, there's poetry to talk about. There's there's always poetry to talk about, and I've gotta be honest, I am burnt out. I'm kind of washed up at this point. There's I made 74 videos in a 29-day month last month, so I am a little bit burnt out, and I am trying very hard to get that, Great Gatsby series back on track. I am failing at that, but as for right now, I have 5 poems from Emily Dickinson, and I want to share them with you. This is a live stream that is going to be a 5 live, just sort of off the cuff, right? Just sort of you and me. We've got poetry to talk about. Let's do it. And the perfect poem is here for us. Emily Dickinson, this is the 1st of March. Emily Dickinson has a poem titled Dear March, Come In, and it reads as such. Dear March, come in. How glad I am. I hoped for you before. Put down your hat. You must have walked. How out of breath you are. Dear March, how are you and the rest? Did you leave nature well? Oh, March, come right upstairs with me. I have so much to tell. I got your letter, and the birds, the maples never knew that you were coming till I called. I declare how red their faces grew. But March, forgive me, and all those hills you left for me to hew. There was no purple suitable. You took it all with you. Who knocks? That April, lock the door. I will not be pursued. He stayed away a year to call when I am occupied. But trifles look so trivial as soon as you have come, that blame is just as dear as praise, and praise as mere as blame. You know, every winter, every season turns, right? Winter comes in, fall comes in, summer comes in. But I think what Emily Dickinson really captures here is that none of these seasons turning are quite as explicit and quite as welcome as spring coming in. Spring bringing with it, this poem reminds me of another one. I don't know them by number, so you'll have to bear with me here. But Emily Dickinson, one of the things that is so profound, I think, about Emily Dickinson, one of the things that will leave you in awe if you allow it, is just how wild, and we'll get to one of these poems, her mind is. To personify not really the spring, but March itself and April after it. Um, in this way that makes them so very personal, so very personable, that they are pursuing her, right? And we've got some poems for the winter, I think, that are going to be the next ones, because this poem here talks about how welcome March is. And it reminds me a little bit of poem 511, If You Were Coming in the Fall. If you were coming in the fall, I'd brush the summer by with half a smile and half a spurn, as housewives do a fly. If I could see you in a year, I'd wind the months in balls and put them each in separate drawers, for fear the numbers fuse. If only centuries delayed, I'd count them on my hand, subtracting till my fingers dropped into Van Diemen's land. If certain, when this life was out, that yours and mine should be, I'd toss it yonder like a rind and take eternity. But now, uncertain of the length of this that is between, it goads me like the goblin bee that will not state its sting. The idea of want in Emily Dickinson, the idea of that which she does not have, that which you do not have, is very transparent. And the spring is the time of the time of year, perhaps, when that which you don't have is most promising to be that which you will have, no matter what it is. If it is that you want to pursue love, you want to pursue education, you want to pursue what it is that makes you you, you want to pursue whatever it is, getting out of a stifling winter and into the spring is really what makes that feel possible, I think. The second poem that we have here, I talked about want, right? Emily Dickinson and the idea of want. And one of the things that is prevalent in Emily Dickinson, I think, and maybe I'm just making this up, I can't tell. She never conveys the idea of lesser than. Not to my knowledge. Different than, without, but not lesser than. And for someone like Emily Dickinson, who was a very solitary individual, something like the winter, a northeast winter nonetheless, a northeast winter in the 1800s, nonetheless, would have been nearly a scathing indictment on life itself. And that leads to poems like this, ironically, poem 777, that is, do me a favor and listen for some idea of lesser than. In all of Emily Dickinson's poetry, we have this prevalent and prevailing idea of different, this prevalent and prevailing idea of other. But I don't know that I really ever pick up on an idea that is sort of like lesser than. The loneliness one dare not sound, and would as soon surmise as in its grave go plumbing to ascertain the size. The loneliness whose worst alarm is lest itself should see, and perish from before itself, for just a scrutiny. The horror not to be surveyed, but skirted in the dark, with consciousness suspended, and being under lock. I fear me this is loneliness, the maker of the soul, its caverns and its corridors illuminate or seal. So we have the ideas of promise, the ideas of hoping for some company, the ideas of maybe the spring will be different in if you were coming in the fall and Dear March come in. But the loneliness one dare not sound is not quite so promising a poem at all, is it? The loneliness one dare not sound is a poem that I think can wreck you, right? A poem that can take you and just tear you apart. There we go. The loneliness one dare not sound. Why would one dare not sound the loneliness? The loneliness one dare not sound. Why? If you've ever been that type of isolated, I think you have to wonder whether or not there is an escape. The loneliness one dare not sound. You don't dare to say it out loud that you are lonely. You don't dare to make those intimations. You don't dare to pass that incantation through your lips because what if that jinxes things and you are forever so lonely? The same type of lonely that is communicated in the third poem here. I tried to think a lonelier thing than any I had seen, some polar expiation, an omen in the bone of death's tremendous nearness. I probed retrieveless things, my duplicate to borrow. A haggard comfort springs from this belief that somewhere within the clutch of thought there dwells one other creature of heavenly love, forgot. I plucked at our partition as one should pry the walls between himself and horror's twin within opposing cells. I almost strove to clasp his hand, such luxury it grew, that as myself could pity him, perhaps he pitied me. If you have Emily Dickinson that you want me to read, make sure to leave it in the chat. But um, wow, when you talk about the powers of the power of the mind to conceive a thing and to communicate that thing, what we have here with Emily Dickinson in this poem, that is wild. I mean, she doesn't have a cell phone, right? So I tried to think a lonelier thing and then conjure it up, reach out and touch it. This idea would be so foreign in the world of Emily Dickinson as to make you wonder just how many mushrooms she must have eaten. This idea would have been so outrageous at the time. I tried to think a lonelier thing. Maybe if there is some idea in Emily Dickinson of the lesser, maybe it's communicated there. I tried to think a lonelier thing. I tried to think a lonelier thing, not a person, but is that inherent in the poem? Is it that our speaker is suggesting that people are lonely, or that there is some mechanism within the individual, the person, the human, that makes them more susceptible to loneliness than anything else? I tried to think a lonelier thing, and the only thing that came to mind was another person. This polar, not some insignificant something. It was a person, a human, on the other side of this loneliness. Another line from this poem that always gets me. There dwells one other creature of heavenly love forgot. This is if we're looking at the Bible, I think what this is the speaker putting themselves in league with Cain, right? That was sort of the curse of Cain, was that he was cast out and to be forgotten. Because one of the depending on how you're reading the Bible, one of the things that makes heaven heaven and hell hell is that in heaven you're just with God. Like, that's the big thing. You're in company with God. This was the thing that made being cast out from the Garden of Eden so frightful for Adam and Eve. Cain, thereafter, was forgotten. He was cast out to be forgotten. It's also a strange sort of section of the Bible to be looking at, because Adam and Eve's sons, Cain and Abel, go and find wives, right? So it really sort of leads you down this path of, were Adam and Eve meant to be the first two people, or were they meant to be the first two people of their sacred tribe? Otherwise, where'd they find those other ladies? But this poem, I tried to think a lonelier thing. Just sit down with it for an hour some night. Sit down with it for an hour and try to figure it out. This is one of those poems you don't really hear about anywhere. You don't really find "I Tried to Think a Lonelier Thing" in poetry compilations. You don't really find it in classrooms. You don't really find it from anyone, really. It's not compiled anywhere. I don't know of a harder hitting poem in the English language than "I Tried to Think a Lonelier Thing." When you really get down to the brass tacks of it, when you really get down to what the poem is saying, what is implied in the emotions strewn about the poem. I tried to think a lonelier thing, and the only thing I could come up with was another human being. Is there something inherent to the human experience that is just so um I don't even know the words. Is there something inherent to the human experience that seems to require the company of others? Is that thing there? The next poem I want to read, we've had a couple poems that are maybe spring-like. Dear March, come in, right? The hopefulness of if you were coming in the fall. Obviously, that sounds like fall, but you see what I'm saying there. A couple for the winter of loneliness. Maybe there's one for summer here. Wild nights, wild nights. Were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to pass in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, ah, the sea. But I but more tonight in thee. Emily. It's enough to make a grown man blush. What what does wild nights mean? What else could it mean? Do you think wild nights would be talking about a game of poker? What are we talking about here with wild nights? Wild nights, were I with thee, wild nights should be our luxury. And then that final stanza, rowing in Eden. What is the motion of rowing? Just think about it for a moment. Ah, the sea. Might I but more tonight in thee. Can I park it in you tonight, baby? She didn't try. I don't think this is one of the ones that she tried to get published in her day. That is a scandalous type of poem. Might I but more tonight in thee. And the final poem that I have scheduled, that I have planned to read. The brain is wider than the sky, for put them side by side, the one the other will contain with ease, and you beside. The brain is deeper than the sea, for hold them blue to blue, the one the other will absorb as sponges buckets do. The brain is just the weight of God, for heft them pound for pound, and they will differ if they do, as syllable from sound. The Hemi engine, I always talk about, with which Emily Dickinson was equipped. You know, it makes me wonder how someone gets there. How does someone get to that level of brilliance? How does someone get to that level of genius? That level of her brain being wider than the sky. How does someone get there? How much of that is born into you? How much of that is just inherent? How much of that is IQ? And how much of it is skill, right? Emily Dickinson, an individual who was notoriously isolated, someone who was left only at times with her own brilliance, her own genius. How hard would that be? How hard would it be to be Emily Dickinson and have all of this going on in your head and have no release, really? She wrote all these poems, but there was only a handful that she ever tried to get published in her lifetime. Just a handful that she ever tried. If you have any Emily Dickinson poems you want to hear, leave them in the chat there. I'm going to go to the introduction. So what I have here is the complete poems of Emily Dickinson. There are certain significant dates in American literary history during the 19th century. One was August 21st, 1837, when Emerson, before the Phi Beta Kappa Society at Cambridge, Massachusetts, delivered in the presence of Thoreau's graduating class American Scholar, his American Scholar address, immediately hailed by young Oliver Wendell Holmes as our intellectual Declaration of Independence. One was the day early in July 1855 when Whitman, for the convenience of private reading only, began circulating printed copies of his Leaves of Grass. A third is surely April 15th, 1862, when Thomas Wentworth Higginson received a letter from Emily Dickinson enclosing 4 of her poems. Emily Dickinson, then 31 years old, was writing a professional man of letters to inquire whether her verses, quote, breathed. Higginson was living at Worcester, Massachusetts, where he had recently resigned his pastorate of a free church and was beginning to establish a reputation as essayist and lecturer in case of reforms. She dared bring herself to his attention because she had just read his letter to a young contributor. Practical advice for those wishing to break into print and the lead article in the current issue of the Atlantic Monthly, charge your style with life. He commented and went on to declare that the privilege of bringing forward new genius was fascinating. His article happened to appear exactly at the moment that Emily Dickinson was ready to seek criticism. She knew him to be a liberal thinker interested in the status of women in general and women writers in particular. Though the article drew responses, all of which Higginson judged not for publication, he sensed some quality in the enclosures of the letter at Amherst which elicited a reply. He asked for more verses, inquired her age, her reading, and her companionships. The fact that Emily Dickinson died with just a handful of publications is one of the blights on American literature, is one of the blights on American society, maybe, is one of the blights on, in my opinion, the intelligentsia. In my opinion, it is a blight on gatekeepers. In my opinion, to have been handed any of the poems that Emily Dickinson had written and not to have seen them as distinctly above much of the stuff that was being published in the day. Thanks, Adam. That's felonious. To have not understood Emily Dickinson as Emily Dickinson, essentially, look, as much of a lover of Emily Dickinson as I am, I can be a critic of Emily Dickinson. There are a lot. So, first off, Emily Dickinson's poems almost always start off with a bang. Many of them die with a whimper. Okay, many of them die with what appears to be the ramblings of a mad person. Many of Emily Dickinson's poems are sad in those later years because they are so different from her earlier years. They're so removed from her earlier years. Name a subject, Adam. I'll see if she wrote one about a subject that you want to hear. One of the great things about the poems of Emily Dickinson is there is a subject index of subjects But Emily Dickinson, in her later years, sort of, I don't want to say collapsed, but if you have read Emily Dickinson, it is difficult to really parse those last poems 2-3 lines at a time, 20 words total, which are just nothing like her earlier poems. Adam says Triumph, poem 455. Triumph may be of several kinds. There's triumph in the room when that old imperator, death, by faith be overcome. There's triumph of the finer mind when truth, affronted long, advanced unmoved to her supreme, her God, her only throng. A triumph when temptation's bribe be slowly handed back, one eye upon the heaven renounced, and one upon the rack. Severer triumph by himself, severer triumph by himself, experienced who pass, acquitted from that naked bar, Jehovah's countenance. I think that almost all of Emily Dickinson's poems have to be digested at their own speed. Um, so I don't find one on guilt per se. There's not in the subject index one listed under guilt. Oh yeah, Adam. She 1,700 and 60 66 1,775 poems. Almost everything is covered. Um, and not just covered, explored. Emily Dickinson is just so good. Emily Dickinson's just so good. Um, you can sit back with 2 or 3 Emily Dickinson poems and so many would focus on one thing or a handful. How do you mean? Oh, as far as subject matters? So, I mean, let me see. I'll pull up death in subject. Oh, yeah. So for example, death, poem 71, 153, 274, 524, 548, 654, 749, 960, 976, 1334, 1445, 1619, and it continues on the next page. Some of them, some of the subjects that Emily Dickinson wrote about, death. Oh, let me look up bees. See how many times she mentioned bees. 676, 916, 1224, 1405, 1522, 213, 230, 620, 661, 869. There's just certain things that she would focus on, but almost everything is covered in these poems, in her pages, in her words. I don't know where else to go with this. I'm going to be very honest. Um, if you have not read Emily Dickinson, I suggest the way that I suggest you read Emily Dickinson. Deceit. The way that I suggest reading Emily Dickinson is to pick a poem and just go deep on it. So there's no deceit. I'll look up lie. Well, nothing listed under lie either. That's strange. Maybe it's only positive. Positive and death. Truth? Oh, yeah, there's truth for sure. Truth is definitely in here. Pick a poem from Emily Dickinson, read it, and probably there's going to be some words that are difficult. Let's see. Several several on truth. I'll go with 1455. I don't know which one that is. Several several words in there that you probably won't immediately recognize or won't immediately recognize in the context of what was I saying? Won't immediately recognize in the context of what it is that she has said. It is worth looking them up because a lot of times that weird word that she uses will be one that she's sort of bending. She's sort of bending it against what it is, the way that it is suggested to be used. 1455. Opinion is a flitting thing, but truth outlasts the sun. If then we cannot own them both, possess the oldest one. What a original way to say facts don't care about your feelings. Opinion is a flitting thing, but truth outlasts the sun. If then we cannot own them both, possess the oldest one. Also on Truth 836. Doesn't make it easy to turn to the poems, I'll tell you that much. There's so many of them. Truth is as old as God, his twin identity, and will endure as long as he, a co-eternity, and perish on the day himself is borne away from mansion of the universe, a lifeless deity. So she's convinced that truth is set. The truth is set in stone. She's convinced that truth has always been and always been the same. You're right. Yes, her mind is beautiful. There's going to be if you active, oh golly. So her first poem as we have compiled is from 1850 and her final poem, oh yeah, so eventually there's no real dating on the poems. We have no real way to understand when it was that they were written, but the latest date, definitive sort of date, was 1885. So 1886. So she was writing for 36 years. Um, oh no. In fact, it's almost so. There's an old story of Hemingway. Hemingway had written, I think it was like 15, 20 short stories, and he had gone to Paris, I believe, after the war with his first wife, and she was going to surprise him by bringing him his stories, and his suitcase got lost. So all of that work of Ernest Hemingway has just gone to the sands of time, just disappeared. We have no idea what those first short stories were. Emily Dickinson had all of her poems sort of bundled on paper and stuffed into like a sock drawer. So what we have is 1,775 poems. That's what we have. And so there's a handful of years that were her most prevalent. There were a handful of years where she was, I mean, just ripping off fantastic poems. It makes me wonder how many of these poems we lost. It makes me wonder how many of her poems were never written down. How many of her poems were on some scrap piece of paper that was just tossed away? How many of her poems do not exist that once were? Oh, me too, Maria. If all of my writing was summarily nixed from the planet. How you doing, Bob? Um, just crazy. Just crazy to think how many of Emily Dickinson's poems disappeared. Never really were. Does anyone have any other Emily Dickinson? Any ideas for Emily Dickinson poems to read, or subjects, or first lines, etc.? But it strikes me that Emily Dickinson will present herself to you through one poem and di- disappeared. I don't know. Emily Dickinson will present herself to you through a poem, and eventually that poem will make sense to you, and you will you will be able to really sort of understand more Emily Dickinson. A lot of writers are that way. No missing or disappeared. Yeah, no missing or disappeared. Um, One of Emily Dickinson poems that always eludes me is the one that begins, "A solemn thing it was, I said, a woman white to be." Poem 271, way back here. Oh, well. "A solemn thing it was, I said, a woman white to be, and were, if God should count me fit, her blameless mystery. A hallowed thing to drop a life into the purple well, to plummetless that it return eternity until I pondered how the bliss would look, and would it feel as big when I could not take it in my hand as hovering seen through fog. And then the size of this small life, that sages call it small, swelled like horizons in my vest, and I sneered softly, small? I don't know. That's a rough one. Um, you have to wonder. A solemn thing it was, I said, a woman white to be. Eventually, in her life, she started dressing completely in white. She was the woman in white. She was locked away in the attic wearing only white. You have to wonder if there is some special meaning to the word white in this poem. If it does mean innocence, if it means untouched, if it means any of those classic things that you think of when white is mentioned. White garb. What was she? If she was dressed in white all the time, was she considering herself married to something? Right? White being the opposite of black, black being mourning. A woman white to be, and where, if God should count me fit, her blameless mystery. So I imagine that what we're doing with that poem, without having spent a whole lot of time with it, is we're talking about innocence, blamelessness, a blameless woman, you know, a hallowed thing to drop a life into the purple well, too plummetless, that it return eternity until I pondered how the bliss would look, and would it feel as big when I could take it in my hand as hovering seen through fog. And then the size of this small life that sages call it small swelled like horizons in my chest, and I sneered softly, small. Is she the best poet in your opinion, Adrian, or just a favorite, or both? So, you know, I think that for me, So I've always talked about there's your favorite, there's the greatest of all time, and there's the best to ever do it. So in I don't know how else to say this. I don't know how so in boxing terms, the greatest of all time, this is the only way I know how to explain this in the way that I think of it. The greatest of all time is Muhammad Ali because Muhammad Ali changed the game of boxing or the not the Muhammad Ali changed the game of boxing. Muhammad Ali added to what was acceptable in the ring. Muhammad Ali transcended the sport and changed culture writ large. That's the greatest of all time in boxing, in my opinion. The best to ever do it. The guy who got in the ring and did what you were supposed to do, bop, 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 bop. The guy who did that best is Money Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather has been hit 3 times in his career. Floyd Mayweather was knocked down once, I believe, and it wasn't exactly clean, if I'm remembering correctly. So that's the greatest of all time, Muhammad Ali, the best to ever do it, Floyd Mayweather. But my favorite is Marvelous Marvin Hagler. My favorite is Marvelous Marvin Hagler because he just had so much piss and vinegar. The guy was the original Sith. He used to lock himself away for months in training camp before a fight in some crazy um he had bought a big estate in the Northeast where it was snowy like 40% of the year, and he would punish himself in the name of the other boxer. That this is your fault that I'm here. You're going to get it. So in my opinion, there's those 3 delineations. The greatest of all time, the best to ever do it, and your favorite, right? The greatest of all time in poetry is probably Shakespeare. Shakespeare changed definitionally what poetry could be. He came out swinging basically one time with his sonnets, and after that, everything was different. The best to ever do it in poetry is a difficult question to answer because I'd agree with 3 earmarks. Can we count Shakespeare as one? So I think Shakespeare would be the greatest of all time. The best to ever do it is difficult with something like poetry because what is it? Yeah, yeah, yeah. What is it? What is poetry? If we count the adherence to verse, the adherence to it might be John Donne. Kind of what I'm getting around to is the greatest of all time might be John Donne with what poetry is on the page. My favorite is Emily Dickinson, yeah, but I don't think that we can count Emily Dickinson just in that way. Emily Dickinson has not had the cultural impact of Shakespeare. Emily Dickinson did not have the sort of impact on, so oftentimes the greatest of all time can be the greatest of all time can be appreciated by everyone. Anyone can watch Muhammad Ali in the ring and say, "Look, I don't know what boxing is, but that guy's not getting touched." The best to ever do it is someone that is often appreciated most by connoisseurs of the thing. You talk to boxers about Floyd Mayweather Jr., oh man, I don't know how he doesn't get hit. I don't know how he understands where that next swing is coming from. I don't understand how he does this. I don't understand how he does that. I don't understand how he knows what he knows. Maybe that's John Donne for a lot of the technical pieces of poetry. Emily Dickinson came along and basically cleared the slate. Like kind of just said, I don't care what's popular. I don't care what subjects are fit. I don't care what people are doing with line and verse on the page. I don't care what people are doing as far as, I mean, look at the subject matters of her day. If you go back and pull up poetry from the 1860s in America, it's not super impressive. I mean, the stuff that you're getting, off. So there's a book called Lincoln's Melancholy. One second. In Lincoln's Melancholy, he is described at one point as dripping with melancholy by one of his friends. And you don't really know how much of this to take for granted, because one of the things that was sort of in vogue at that time was being kind of melancholy, was being sort of down. That was just sort of what was socially accepted at the time. So much so, I'll see if I can find it here. I don't know if I'm going to be able to. There was a poem that was published that people thought, have gone back and think, was written by Abraham Lincoln. And it was really nothing special. Poetry of Lincoln. Well, maybe I've found it. 41. Oh, nope. But yeah, the whole thing at the time was to be sort of depressed, sort of morose, sort of out of it, sort of when you think of Edgar Allan Poe, that was sort of the popular thing at the time. Yeah, I might not be able to find it, guys. But there was a poem that was supposedly written by Abraham Lincoln. If this isn't it, I don't know where it's at. So bear with me for 1 second here. So this looks like this is one that he definitely wrote. Lincoln said he wasn't sure he had constructed the poem properly. Indeed, that longing for something elusive and grappling with the knowledge of it will remain forever so. Was the subject of the poem, which began, my childhood's home I see again, and gladden with the view, and still as memory crowds my brain, there's sadness in it too. O memory, thou midway world, twixt earth and paradise, where things decayed and loved ones lost and dreamy shadows rise. Lincoln worked from a common form, recalling an early home, the distant images of childhood, the death of loved ones. Yet the typical course of amateur poetry was to strain for a sentimental cheer or piety. Lincoln went the other way, emphasizing how his experience in his home village brought him to contact with the idea of death. The poem carries on. I hear the loved survivors tell how naught from death could save, till every sound appears a knell, and every spot a grave. I range the fields with pensive tread, and pace the hollow rooms, and feel companion of the dead. I'm living in the tombs. So it's kind of, oh, but here's an object more of dread than aught the grave contains. A human form with reason fled, while wretched life remains. And now a way to seek some scene, less painful than the last, with less of horror mingled in, the present and the past. The very spot where grew the bread that formed my bones I see, how strange old field on the tread, and feel I'm part of thee. O death, thou awe-inspiring prince that keeps the world in fear, why dost thou tear more blessed ones hence and leave them lingering here? So you see what the whole thing there in Lincoln with Edgar Allan Poe is the morose, is sort of the downer type stuff, but Emily Dickinson doesn't really treat those subjects as such. Emily Dickinson is Emily Dickinson seems to take these things from a I had no idea suggest that Lincoln was a closet poet. There's suggestions that Lincoln was a closet a lot of things. Um, if you get into his, I think it was in his 30s where he was living with a guy. Um, Everyone in the town thought that they were a couple, but Emily Dickinson does not take these ideas of death and of anything. I don't know how to say what I'm trying to say. Emily Dickinson employed these darker subjects as I think she was teetotal, as facts of the universe, not even facts of life, not facts of Earth, not facts of society. Emily Dickinson took these morose ideas and employed them as realities of the universe, as universal truths. Um, so yeah, those are the things that I get from Emily Dickinson. Um, Anything else? Ideas, thoughts, questions, deals? Yeah, that is Emily Dickinson feels dark, but it doesn't feel sad. That's a very good point, Maria. There is very little sentimentality lingered in much Emily Dickinson. Maybe a strange dichotomy there is that idealism will be lingered on. I can't remember where it is in here. I died for beauty, but was scarce adjusted in the tomb. When one who died for truth was lain in an adjoining room, he questioned softly why I failed for beauty. I replied, and I for truth, the two are one, we brethren are, he said. And so as kinsmen met at night, we talked between the rooms until the moss had reached our lips and covered up our names. The idealism there is lingered on. The ideas of what it means to live or die for beauty. Those things are lingered on past the grave, by the way. But the death is not lingered on. Oh, I died for beauty. That's why I'm here. What are you in for? Right? It's almost like a prison sentence. You talk to, so if you're in prison with people who are there because they murdered, because they robbed. Are they going to say that their life is about murder? Are they going to say that their life is about robbery? No, that is what got them there. Now they have the rest of it. Does she write about love? Does she write about the as a universal idea, or does she ever talk about it between individuals? So there is, let's see, let's get to the index of subjects. There's a lot of love I got to figure out. So they have it broken down. Love in general, mother's love, cherishing, test of love, legacy of love, divinity of love, waiting on love, outgrown love, narrowing love, Koval with poetry. I don't know what that is. Incidents of love, boon of love, achieved by few. Oh, that's a good one. 1680. Sometimes with the heart, seldom with the soul, scarcer once with the might, few love at all. Sometimes with the heart we love, seldom with the soul, scarcer once with the might, scarcer once with the might, few love at all. Evil, the idea of evil. I feel there's an interesting absence of evil in her poems. I don't know if I let's see. Yeah, there's nothing listed with evil as the subject. We got the devil, 1479. I don't know if I've read that one. I'm sure this is just absolutely scintillating. The devil. Oh yeah, I've read. Yeah, I have a video on this one. The devil, had he fidelity, would be the best friend because he has ability, but devils cannot mend. Perfidy is the virtue that would but he resign. The devil, without question, were thoroughly divine. See, even there, she's talking about what a good friend the devil could be. She's not moralizing, she's not castigating. She's saying, look, the devil gets a bad rap. He could be a pretty good guy from time to time. Um, yeah, it is. It is. I'm going to be very honest. This is a live stream today because I did not have the energy to really pinpoint something to talk about. Um, that's actually amazing. God is a jealous lover, but the devil gets a bad rap. I knew I liked her. Yeah, it's almost so she has, and Adam says she's finding beauty in all things. She has an exquisite ability to be very close to contrarian without perhaps ever going over the line to contrarian. Um, and I think that's much harder, right? Because what she's not doing is just saying, okay, well, A equals one. What if B equaled one instead? Um, and on the, I'm through, I'm, I can't remember what it's called. She doesn't go over the line to full contrarian. She is always sort of I can't remember what the first line is, guys, but she's always taking a different stance. And I think that's one of the ways that she's so strong is that you'd never know what to expect from her. If she were just contrarian, if she were just saying God is bad and the devil is good, well, you'd know where she was with things. You'd know what to expect from her poetry. But that's not what she's doing. And she, in this way, perhaps she becomes even more human. In fact, this might be the most human thing about her is that you don't know what she's going to say. You don't know where her next opinion is going to come from. I wish I could remember that first line. I'm through with something, I think. It's a very contrarian poem. I'm seated. 508. That's what it is. So here. Whoa, Adam, you don't have to. No, no, don't. I look, guys. If you give me money through this, I don't even know how to get there. I don't even know how this goes through. So I hope that I appreciate that. I really do. I I don't think what I'm doing here is worth monetary reward. I've been on here doing this basically for free for nearly a decade now. So I really appreciate that. But goes right into your maybe. I guess I'll have to figure it out now. Um, so when we talk about Emily Dickinson on the level of you've been watching, when did you start commenting, Adam? You started commenting fairly recently, didn't you? You should have been piping up the whole time. Am I wrong about that, Adam? It's been within the last year that you started commenting, right? When I had a friend, there's no friends. Wow, you've been here since Hunger Games? Wow. That is 2018. Well, I'm glad you stopped lurking and started piping up, Adam. Um, you've been here since Again But Better? Yeah, that was a trip, huh? That was a trip. Um, Emily Dickinson, when we start talking about contrarianism, when we start talking about give me a second to contextualize this because we were talking about Emily Dickinson not taking the route that you think she's going to take. When you start taking the route about being a contrarian, but not for the sake of contrarianism, listen to this poem. Listen to this poem and try try to guess what the next line is if you've never heard this poem. Try to picture, envision, understand what the next line is. This is an Emily Dickinson poem that I only found 3 years ago, I think, something like that. Fell instantly in love with it. I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. And they can put it with my dolls, my childhood, and the string of spools I've finished threading too. Baptized before without the choice, but this time consciously of grace unto supremest name. Called to my full, the crescent dropped, existence's whole arc filled up with one small diadem. My second rank, too small the first, crowning on my father's breast, a half unconscious queen, but this time adequate, erect, with will to choose or to reject, and I choose just a crown. Oh, the sheer piss and vinegar in that poem, the sheer prictitude on the page, the ultimate dose of screw yourself from a poet. I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. Oh, and if you want, so one of the greatest things about poetry, right, is that when we're talking about the emphasis in a short story, when we're talking about the emphasis in a novel, a lot of that gets pushed off onto the dialogue. It's the dialogue that you have to question for where the meaning is coming from for the characters in this poem. The only character is the speaker, the only real tangible character. There's the they in question, but the only tangible character is our speaker. If you want to change up the the emphasis here on different words, I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. I'm seated. I've stopped being theirs. So where do you want to put that emphasis? The name they dropped upon my face with water in the country church is finished using now. How immediate is that now? How forceful? How necessary? I always remembered what you say about Dickinson's irreverence being so powerful because she lived in a time when belief in God was just assumed. Not just assumed. I'm going to go back to Lincoln's Melancholy because there's a story here when we if you want to talk about God in the world of Emily Dickinson, we have a story about um, Abraham Lincoln going to church when the Civil War was either just breaking out or was looking bad for the North. I can't remember exactly when this story comes from. They were singing a song. As these lyrics made the rounds of Union troops, Southern soldiers fashioned their own God's army. The seal of the Confederacy contained the inscription Deo Vindis, God will vindicate. When the rebels fared well early in fighting, they plainly saw God's hand. Lincoln cut straight to the contradiction of both sides, assuming that God was on their side. Both may be, and one must be wrong. No one, not he, not Julia, not Howard, not Howe or Thomas, Stonewall Jackson, that pious and fierce Southern warrior, knew just what God intended. We must work earnestly in the best light he gives us, Lincoln wrote, trusting that so working still concludes the great ends he ordains. Once a minister remarked to Lincoln something along the lines of, I hope the Lord is on our side. Lincoln said he didn't agree, adding, in substance, I hope we are on the Lord's side. So uh, Maria says that it's interesting that during Emily Dickinson's time, God was assumed, and Emily Dickinson had a much more difficult relationship with divinity than its assumption. Not only in Emily Dickinson's time was God assumed, in Emily Dickinson's time, if you were alive, you just assumed God was on your side. So there's a very big there's a very big idea with that. If you've ever heard of Christopher Hitchens, Christopher Hitchens used to get in. So he wrote a book called God Is Not Great, and instead of just going around doing speeches to promote his book, what he did was he scheduled debates with theologian apologists. There were some Muslims, there were some Christians, there were some Jews. And one of the arguments that always came up against Christopher Hitchens is that these religious apologists would say, look, if you don't believe in God's will, if you don't believe in God, period, what stops you from going around and doing these evil acts, right? And for an atheist, this is sort of a boring argument. For an atheist, this is um, Penn from Penn and Teller answers this well. When people say, well, why don't you do all of the killing and raping that you want? And he says, I do. The number is zero, right? But what Christopher Hitchens did in these debates is that he would say, look, you can say that an atheist has no supreme power to be afraid of. And so the atheist can go around and burn down buildings and kill people and rob if he wants to. And maybe he can. But here's what people who believe in God do. People who believe in God, depending on how that right, not all of them, but he would say that what people will do is instead of saying, well, there's no one to be afraid of, I can do this, what they will do is say, God wants me to, so I must do this. This is where you get pogroms from. This is where you get um, the you get religious wars. You get the Christian. What were they called when they Middle Ages? They went over to the Holy Lands and just killed everyone. I'm losing words right now, but you understand what I'm saying. Crusades, yes, Maria, Crusades. They did. Adam, good job. Crusaders, yes. That is exactly what I'm talking about. That is exactly the point that Christopher Hitchens would make, is that such things like the Crusades only make sense if you believe in a God. He went a step further in these debates to say things like there are certain things which are exclusively religious domains of violence because they don't make sense if you're an atheist. If you are doing suicide bombings, not a whole lot of atheists in that crowd, right? Um, where were we here? Adam had said something. Does she write about divinity? So the way that she writes about divinity is interesting. The way that she writes about divinity is almost in non-religious terms. Of course, it's not listed in these subjects, so maybe it's not the direct emphasis of any of her poems. Um, but the way that she writes about divinity is is almost as if divinity is something to be achieved. Does she look at it as a philosophy or as an illness or a contagion of sort? Look at what religion, religiosity. What is it that you're asking about there, Adam? So religion, religiosity. She has an interesting relationship. There are certain poems that she throws out there that seem as God worshiping as anything you could ever find from any poet. There are things that she throws out there that are almost religious in their own right. Um, but there are other things. So, as far as I know, there is no real there is no real take on what it is that Emily Dickinson thought about God. And look, like we said earlier, like you asked earlier, Adam, how long was she active? We have 35 documented years of her writing. Who knows how much of this comes before or after, how much of this we have lost. We have 35 years documented of her writing. Do your feelings on God change? Do you have the same stance on God that you did 15 years ago? Right? All of these things, all of these ideas, we have we have so much from her that's so one of the things that is very special about her writing is almost like Marcus Aurelius. We don't know that she ever even intended to publish. She called publication the auction of the mind of man. She called publication basically bastardization of thought, right? So much of her writing is fairly evidently not to be, uh, there's no facade on it. Whatever we have in Emily Dickinson writing is unbridled in its authenticity. 1317, Maria, which I don't know if I've ever read that one. Abraham to kill him was distinctly told. Isaac was an urchin. Abraham was old. No hesitation, Abraham complied. Flattered by obeisance, tyranny demurred. Isaac to his children lived to tell the tale. Moral was a mastiff. Manners may prevail. That's rough. That's a rough one to put out there. Um, that's one of the ones that oftentimes I think people will sort of wonder if Emily Dickinson was an atheist. I think that's one of the ones that has to make you wonder, right? That's one of the ones that has to conjure up questions of whether or not she thought those books were all that compelling. Yeah. Moral with a mastiff. Manners may prevail. That's wild. Anything else? I think that she was just not all impressed by the tyrant. She's got balls for sure. I love to admire her bravery. Yeah, both of those things, those are very compelling chats to come in at the same time, right? Because is it ballsy to stand up to someone who has a lower status than you? Is that brave? No, but if you're standing up to the tyrant, it is. And if you're standing up to what might be the tyrant of tyrants, right? That could be pretty brave too. The tyrant of tyrants who knows your own thoughts. So one of the things that we don't really credit, if you think the tyrant is beneath, so that's an interesting point. But even if a tyrant is beneath you, still that tyrant would have power over you, right? That's what makes a tyrant a tyrant. So here's an interesting dichotomy that we don't really credit people with. Emily Dickinson has a fair deal of poems in here that seem to be criticizing God, criticizing the Bible. And because of those poems, there's a lot of speculation that maybe Emily Dickinson was an atheist. Maybe Emily Dickinson did not believe in God. But what if she did? Right? We don't really credit her with that. If Emily Dickinson did believe in God, but was still willing to say, hey, man, I think you're wrong on this one, right? In, and it's easy to say that Emily Dickinson lived in a world where everyone believed in God. A very big part of that is that in the time when she lived, there weren't a whole lot of compelling reasons not to. So it's really maybe a stretch to say that she did not believe in God, did not believe in the Christian God at that. Even as well lettered as people were, it yeah, I think Darwinism was we were on the precipice of it here. Um 18 well, she lived through 1880, 1880. So she would have been right in the heyday of it later in life of the sort of but even Darwinism, right? Even Darwinism, when you really start looking at early Darwinism, does not necessarily say that God's not real, right? So the first arguments of evolution, the first popular arguments of evolution, in fact, the theory itself was based on finches, right? Generations of finches, not millions of years of evolution. So even accepting proper Darwinism, as it were, early on, and remember, guy, I mean, this wasn't in the age of the internet. If one guy in your town had read the book, then only as many people as listened to that guy would know the theory, right? And did that guy get it right? So I don't know what an alternative would be. Then again, Percy Shelley was before her time, and he was an atheist, wasn't he? I don't know. That's how it is now with the Amish around me. Yeah, not a whole lot of Amish in Kansas City. A lot of Mormons. I lived around a lot of Mormons in St. Joe, and I don't have anything bad to say about Mormon people, but they can be some strange ones. They can be some strange individuals. Um, do things in spite of a God that they believe in. That's a rough call. That's a rough call. There's a larger Muslim population in Kansas City now than there was. Um, a woman that I walk with sometimes, very devout Muslim. The Mormon, so Mormons are weird folks. Like I know that sounds bad to say about a whole group of people, but they're weird folks. Weird in a good way, right? Not in a bad way. Not like I don't know, not in a bad way. They firmly believe they'll go to hell for having a cell phone and have one anyway. It's an internal battle for a few. Yeah, I think we've all gone through those internal battles with God, right? I think especially when we are first learning about the world and of God. How many of us got through middle school without doing what we thought was sinning, alone in the bathroom, right? Um, makeup was sinful while themselves wearing makeup. That's rough. That's a rough one. It's interesting. Talking about Emily Dickinson and religiosity, a lot of the attacks from Emily Dickinson on religion seem to be with religiosity, seem to be with um, the parts of the religion that humans are in control of. So I don't see if there's anything just calling out religion in the back of in the subjects index. There's revelation. There's rapture. Does not look like religion itself. Let's go with Revelation 6:62. Embarrassment of one another and God is revelation's limit. Allowed is nothing that is chief, but still divinity dwells under seal. Yeah, that's one of those ones you got to spend some time with, I think. I don't really know exactly what that one's about. Um, the fact that she was so prolific, she has subject index, is a feat all in its own. Yeah, look, here's the thing. A lot of her poems, not very big. That's the book in its totality. That is the book. That is Emily Dickinson's. And to not title them either. Anybody want to throw out a random number between 1 and 1775? See what poem that is from Emily Dickinson. 1,775 poems because America starts next, right? The preeminent American poet. America starts in 1776. Emily Dickinson stops at 1775. Anybody with a number between 1 and 1775? 34. Is that one that you know, Maria? Or are you just throwing that out there? Oh, looks like maybe you okay, you didn't. If you're telling the truth, or are you lying? It's a sin. Heaven has different signs to me. Sometimes I think that noon is but a symbol of the place, and when again at dawn a mighty look runs round the world and settles in the hills, and awe, if it should be like that, upon the ignorance steals. The orchard when the sun is on, the triumph of the birds when they together victory make, some carnivals of clouds. the rapture of a finished day returning to the west. All these remind us of the place that men call paradise. Itself be fairer, we suppose, but how ourself shall be, adorned for superior grace, not yet our eyes can see. Some carnival of clouds. Wow. Yeah. So some of the 921, you said, Adam, some of the phrases in Emily Dickinson are just stunning. If it had no pencil, would it try mine? Worn now and dull, sweet, writing much to thee. If it had no word, would it make the daisy most as big as I was when it plucked me? I have no idea what that poem is about. But if it had no pencil, would it try mine? Yeah, she's got some of the greatest opening lines, opening couplets in all of poetry. Um, Clearly my intuition has taste. Clearly your intuition is on subject, Maria. We were just talking about Emily Dickinson and the divine. We were talking about Emily Dickinson and religion. Um, Trying to think if there's anything else here. The What was I saying? Oh yeah, Emily Dickinson definitely has a poem that will speak to you. If you are not into Emily Dickinson, you just have to find that poem. Now, look, it's that way for most writers who have any volume of work, right? Uh, Hemingway didn't speak to me until I found the right Hemingway. William Faulkner didn't speak to me until I read As I Lay Dying for the second and a half time. I think there's something like that for every artist. But when Emily Dickinson hits you, it's one of the things that I always say about football players. My favorite football players, when they hit you, you stay hit, right? When Emily Dickinson hits you, you stay hit. That's what she does. That is what she does. Anything else? Ideas about Emily Dickinson? Poems to read? Things in general? How you've incorporated Emily Dickinson into your daily life? Do you have an Emily Dickinson poster above your bed like I do? No? No Emily Dickinson posters here? You agree with Emily Dickinson, you have to find her through a certain poem? You like to draw her. Did you see the Emily Dickinson did you see the Emily Dickinson picture that they think they found identified of her when she was so the picture you always see of Emily Dickinson where she's sitting in the chair, she's like 16 or 17 years old in that, I think. And then there's the one that they think they have of her that's like the oval portrait. That one, I believe, is from maybe her early 20s. There's one they think they found of her in her 30s. It's her and another woman. And yeah, I if you Google Emily Dickinson picture, look at articles because the pictures that pop up will be mostly the one of her when she was like 17. But they think they have a picture of her as a full grown woman. Um, if you decide to get the book, Adam, get the full thing. There are there's plenty of there's plenty of did she draw or paint? I don't think so. I think she just had words as her art. Pardon me, guys. Uh, I've been sick since November, it seems like. Yeah, the full works and just the best way in my experience, Adam, the best way once you get this book is just start flipping around. Just start flipping around and read one or two every day. Read two every day and figure out which one sticks with you more. And then just kind of get into it from there. Yeah, there is something going around. You're in New York. Yeah, that I there's nobody is healthy here. My mind is blown. It's like finding a new picture of your parents from when they were young. Yeah, isn't that weird, Maria? Like she in the 3 different pictures we think we have of her, she looks like a completely different person in each one. Um, did you know? Did you know? As we're talking about the biographies that I've read in my life, we have an actual picture of the 7th president of the United States, Andrew Jackson. There is a legitimate picture of him, and he was a wild one. Jackson was a wild one. Survived several assassination attempts. When he was, I believe, at his wife's funeral, very old, he was walking up to the casket and somebody jumped out of the chairs with a gun, pulled it out of his pocket, pop. Well, the bullet had dropped out in his pocket, right? It was not a not one of the pistols like we think of. When it's a daguerreotype, Adam. So I think you'll have to look up daguerreotype. Is that how you say that word? I've never known how to say that word. So the guy tried to shoot him with a pistol. The bullet had fallen out in his pocket. He took his other pistol out, tried to shoot Andrew Jackson. The gunpowder had gotten wet because it was a rainy day. Didn't shoot him either. Andrew Jackson then beat the man with his cane. Right? Andrew Jackson was a wild one. Definitely a biography worth reading if you are interested in American history. He yeah, there was a yeah. Um just a wild biography on Andrew Jackson. There was a guy so one of my favorite stories about him is like a 4-part story. His wife, he married maybe before she was divorced from her other husband. Like that was the rumor. So there was all anyone could talk about was how Andrew Jackson's wife was a whore, right? That was what they would say about her. And you better not say that about Andrew Jackson's wife and expect not to hear about it, right? So one guy had said this, and you've heard the phrase the best shot in the West. Andrew Jackson said, "Well, we'll see." And he challenged him to a duel. So they're standing there, and the rules of a duel are each man gets a shot unless he's dead. So this guy who was the best shot in the West, they line up. The referee says, these are the rules of the duel. I can't remember if they had to draw or if they had to pace. I don't remember what it was exactly. But the guy took his gun out and shot him. Boom. And Andrew Jackson didn't fall. Shot him square in the chest. And Andrew Jackson was just standing there. And the guy says, "What happened? I just shot this man. What is going on here?" And the referee says, "Get back on your mark." And Mr. Jackson gets a shot. Andrew Jackson draws his gun. Slow, murderous aim. And kills the man dead. Boom, pop. After which, Andrew Jackson collapses. So Jackson's men come and pick him up and said, "What happened? He shot you in the chest." And Jackson's bleeding copiously from his chest wound. And Andrew Jackson reportedly said to these 2 men, "I would have shot him had he hit me in the brain." Didn't care. He was going to kill that son of a bitch. Another time that Andrew Jackson got shot because someone called his wife a whore, Andrew Jackson took out an ad in the newspaper, because this is how people used to communicate across distances. He took out an ad in the newspaper and said, "Look, if your name is XYZ, I can't remember what the guy's name was. If I see you, I'm going to horsewhip you." And he meant it. So him and his second and third, as they used to refer to each other, his second and third, come across that guy and his second and third. Andrew Jackson did not mince words. He meant what he said. So they're standing there across from each other. Andrew Jackson pulls his whip and he's going to town. All of a sudden, guns are going boom, 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 boom. Andrew Jackson gets hit in the shoulder. It was shortly before, I think he killed the guy again. It was shortly before the Battle of New Orleans. Is that what it was? I'm missing the history right now, but Andrew Jackson was leading some men, I believe, down to New Orleans after that, and he can't move his arm, right? Because he's got a bullet in his arm. Like, they didn't take those things out back then. If it was a shattered bullet, it was just there. He would write his wife letters and include fragments of bone that he had pulled out. And we get from this scene, there's a very famous painting of Andrew Jackson because he was leading these men down there and they kept getting dysentery. They didn't have any food, all this bad stuff. Andrew Jackson, they were about to mutiny. He rides his horse up to the front of the line, hops off his horse, can't use his arm. So he shoves his gun up onto the horse. Says, I want you all to know one thing. Every single one of you is free to leave right now. But I'm shooting the first one of you that moves. Everybody knew he meant it. Everybody knew he meant it. So nobody left. Like, if you want to talk about an effective way to end a mutiny, I suppose you just have to employ Andrew Jackson. He was a wild guy. Anything else on Emily Dickinson? Going once? Going twice? All right, guys, I think I'm going to go ahead and cut out. It was enjoyable spending this last hour and a half with you. She was great, Bob. Still is. Every time you pick her up. Thank you guys for being here. I hope to have you the next time round. I'm not sure. I'm sort of doing the 5 lives on a whim. Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Maria. It was great being here with you guys, and I hope to see you next time.